Well, joining us now, Jessica Levinson, Professor of Law and Governance at Loyola Law School, and Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cypress College. Good to have you guys back. Peter, if the President decides to release the memo, how much harm is there potentially to US law enforcement in the long term for what would essentially be, at best, short-term political gain?
It could be tremendous harm because of the importance of the information there that could compromise a lot of sources and methods of gathering information, and it goes against the whole idea that the government should work in a smooth way with checks and balances and separation of powers and all this. I mean, the actions of Trump and his team of Nunes and them are flying completely against any kind of democratic theory of that of being a republic.
And if people believe the FBI is corrupt or biased, they're less likely to give up information, to be whistleblowers, to cooperate with law enforcement.
It's also very dangerous because you're lowering the legitimacy. And when you lose legitimacy, the government or an agency of the government is completely in a bad situation because people don't pay attention to it. They don't allow it to make decisions and trust its judgment as they should, especially for law enforcement.
Okay, here's Mike Quigley. He's a House Democrat. He's on the Intelligence Committee. This is his assessment of the Republican memo.
They wanted transparency on a one-sided basis, and they did it with an extraordinarily flimsy memo, and I think the FBI was accurate in discussing the quality of that memo. I was a little more harsh as a former professor. I described it as a book report by a junior in high school at 1 o'clock at night, written at 1 o'clock at night with 2 Red Bulls under their belt, and they haven't read the book. As far as I know, only Mr. Gowdy on their side has read the underlying materials.
So, Jessica, given that there is this allegation out there that Nunes didn't actually consult the source material in putting this all together, that assessment has some merit, right?
Yes, and I would also say we may be insulting every high school junior who's amped up on caffeine. And it's exactly what you're saying, that we're talking about the undermining not just of the FBI, not just of the Department of Justice, but we're talking about the undermining of the fabric of our society and the structure of our government. And this isn't just isolated to, well, look at these FBI agents who are texting that they don't like Trump, or Representative Nunes potentially working with President Trump and therefore kind of eroding this line between legislative and executive branch. But this started with comments about so-called judges because of where federal judges were from or what their background was. And so we're seeing a concerted effort to undermine all other aspects and agencies of our governments and to consolidate power with the executive.
I think you can take it even further back. I think you can take this back, a few decades ago with Republicans, not believing the media unless it was Fox News. And from there, it went on to this war with the media. And then if you look at polling now, Republicans don't believe in science or scientists. They think there's a bias there. And then they went after the universities. And now they're turning on the FBI, law enforcement, and in some cases the intelligence community.
This to me is actually one of the things that is most troubling when my students say, how do I respond to someone when I have facts in front of me and I say, well, it's in the, and then they list a news source, which I think is absolutely trustworthy, or I actually have gone to the source material and I've looked at the statistics and there is climate change and it is caused by humans, or there is real problems with criminal justice reform, or kind of pick your area that you care about. And I do not know how to get through to people who are just reading from an entirely different script, which is not true. And we aren't kind of, I mean, this is an extreme example, but it almost is if trying to convince people, no, gravity exists. And you drop the ball and they say, you know what, I think it was a square.
That's right.
Yeah, the common language, a common discourse that's been lost, and that's very important for any kind of democratic society to be able to function.
Yeah, with that in mind, Jack Goldsmith, he was an assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration. Over the weekend on Twitter, he posted this: the growing and dizzying array of threats by Trump and threats by officials to resign in response to Trump's threats suggests that is not a stable situation. How could it be? When Trump finally gets tired of being ignored and follows through on something stupid, the executive branch meltdown will be severe to his enormous detriment and hopefully not the country. Peter, do you share that opinion that this is sort of, we're all leading up to some kind of impending doom at the moment?
It's boiling gradually, but when it gets that boiling point, the lid comes off, and this could very well happen sooner than we expect, especially given all the other intricacies of policy problems such as North Korea, and the judgments have to be made there that to be more diplomatic. None of that's there in this kind of setting and this type of personality.
Yeah, when you're under this sort of pressure and there is so much going on domestically with investigations and scandals and controversies every day, it does beg the question, how do you make a rational decision about North Korea? Or, is the president able to do that?
It seems to me to be very difficult for us to trust that he could do that. And we have people like the psychiatrists out of in the East Coast, one of the universities there, Yale, I believe it was, who's actually done research and is advocating that there should be some kind of an evaluation of the president's mental state. She's not accusing him of being off mentally, just saying that there's a dangerousness that's being brought about by this kind of configuration of forces, and that therefore we have to have an investigation, have an actual medical exam.
Yeah, well,
so to speak. That's another situation.
That ship has sailed.
This is a very... We've never been in this situation before in this country, not modern times.
And we've never been in the situation before where, the law and order party, the Republicans, have essentially been at war with the FBI and the intelligence community and law enforcement. And so, Jessica, by creating this doubt and undermining the FBI and Robert Mueller, so even if there is an outcome to his investigation which finds evidence against the president, is the goal here essentially to ensure that there's a significant percentage of Americans who just don't believe it?
I think that's exactly right, and I think that we've seen this from the very beginning, even before there was a Mueller investigation. And let's remember, there's a reason that we had to appoint a special counsel in the first place to look at these allegations. And the thing that has actually worried me from the night of November 8th on is what happens if we as a nation stop respecting the rule of law. And in this case, it means what happened if the special counsel says, you know what? I think that there are tribal crimes here, and maybe it's not for President Trump because there are legal questions as to whether you can indict a sitting president, but they're with respect to people very close to him. And the nation just decides we're no longer going to respect that. We're no longer going to respect the findings of a grand jury or, for instance, judicial opinions. I mean, at that point, we really have just completely torn apart. And I think that's exactly what there's been a concerted effort to do for now more than a year, which is to say, really, you really believe in judges? You really want to trust that FBI agent? And again, these are people who are sworn to serve our country, not to serve a president. And that's what President Trump fundamentally misunderstands.
Because again, we have another example of sort of a loyalty oath. This time it was the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and he was called into the White House last month. And Trump asked him, if you're on my team. This is a president who seems to not realize that those type of questions, who you voted for, will you be loyal to me, swear a loyalty oath, just incredibly inappropriate. Rosenstein replied, of course, we're all loyal to your team, Mr. President. But he just doesn't understand how inappropriate those questions are.
Or he absolutely understands it, and it's absolutely no problem for him, which is... My guess is that there's no way that as President of the United States, he doesn't have someone surrounding him that explains, here's why it's inappropriate to ask for someone's allegiance, here's why it's inappropriate to ask for somebody's voting record, which we have a number of issues surrounding. We actually still have a secret ballot in this country. So as a superior, to say to someone, how did you vote, we have a whole host of problems surrounding
Especially
that.
when you're the most senior person in the country. So, Peter, on Tuesday, there was this lunch with the president and reporters and network anchors. The House Speaker, Republican Paul Ryan, was there. And he was talking about the FBI memo. And this is what he said. Let it all out. Get it all out there. Cleanse the organization. I think we should disclose all this stuff. It's the best disinfectant. There was a time when Republicans like Ryan would keep their distance from the president and, some of his more dubious claims and try and put some distance between themselves. But clearly that's changed. And what, it's because they're getting tax cuts through the House, because they've got the repeal of Obamacare, they're willing to jump on board the Trump train, if you like, as long as they get this part of their agenda done.
I'm afraid to quote an old scriptural phrase, but they may have sold their soul for a mess of pottage. But far more than that, they could have given up our country's democratic fabric. And Paul Ryan and others should be very serious about going back to where this country came from and where the principles rely. Because when they say things like, let's just overlook this because Trump's giving us the tax cuts, that's something that's very devastating for the future of the country.
Yeah. Finally, the New York Times is reporting that Robert Mueller is taking a close look at that Trump Tower meeting in 2016. This is one between Don Jr., Paul Manafort, and there was a Kremlin-linked lawyer. A whole bunch of Russians turned up. Anyway, this is part of the Times reporting. What is already clear is that Mr. Trump's aides and family members tried over 48 hours to manage one of the most consequential crises of the young administration. The situation quickly degenerated into something of a circular firing squad. They protected their own interests, shifted blame, and potentially left themselves and the president legally vulnerable. You know, this was when the president was on Air Force One at a time and came up with multiple explanations as to what was going on. First, it was about family adoptions. You know, then it was, of course, it was opposition research. One person who may be vulnerable in all this is Hope Hicks, because the Times is reporting that Mark Corello, who's a spokesman for the Trump legal team until he resigned, has been called for an interview with Robert Mueller, and he's expected to say that Hicks, gave every indication that she was willing to destroy evidence, if you like. Those emails from Don Jr., they would not be allowed to get out, is what she said. Her lawyer has denied that she ever said that. But, Peter, as this sort of investigation continues to move into Trump's inner circle like this, we now see, the president, going on the attack more and more and more, releasing this memo despite its accuracy and the fact that it could be totally misleading.
It's unfortunately predictable. In fact, Hope Hicks goes back a long time with the president. She was with him in the Trump organization, personal relationships at his side almost all the time, even in the White House. So there's something there to really take notice of. If she had said that, that's really big trouble for the whole situation. And we're in dangerous waters right now.
And Hope Hicks, just very quickly, Jessica, she is very close to the president. He sees her as a daughter. And in some ways does explain, why he's so eager to put this memo out there as a distraction, if nothing else.
Well, I mean, I think that that's been a pattern that we've seen so often from the Trump administration, is this kind of shock and awe with respect to, I know you're looking over here, but if you could look at the shiny object over here, and if you could just suck up all the oxygen in the room by talking about the deep hypocrisy of the Nunes memo, then you won't be focusing on, and there are so many other things to focus on. But I would say that, Hope Hicks's statement, as far as I see it, is at best kind of ambiguous. And I think Robert Mueller will be very circumspect about actually bringing obstruction of justice charges, because it's very difficult to prove.
Yeah, it seems there's a lot of evidence that we've seen of the obstruction of justice, but as you say, the bar is incredibly high. So
there's a lot of evidence we've seen of Trump trying to tell people, let's slow down this investigation. But that's different from, could you get to a point where a jury would say, yes, you hit all the prongs of the statute.
Okay. Well, the investigation is long. I guess we'll find out. Jessica and Peter, thanks so much.